Shall we play a game?
Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Adam J. Pestridge and welcome to another P3D video. And today we're talking all about the frame rate of the sim, how to get a smooth flight experience. I'm going to show you exactly what you need to do in order to achieve that. So a little disclaimer first. Not everybody is going to be able to achieve what is shown in this video. It really does depend on a lot of different factors to whether or not this will even work for you. It works for me, and that's really what I'm going to show. Anybody with my same or similar setup should achieve what I'm about to show. Anybody who has a less hardware setup, and my specs are in the description box below, will probably find it more difficult and might have to change certain things with what I'm about to say in order to gain the similar or same result. So we're talking about flight simulation. We're talking about our frame rates. Why is a frame rate important? Well, frame rate, for me personally, I believe governs your entire enjoyment of your sim. You know, if you have a stuttery flight experience, it can actually hinder your ability to land your plane. You know, if your frame rate suddenly drops as you're coming in on your final, your joystick you're going to start to overcompensate with, because there's going to be a lag of information delivery from your joystick to your flight sim because the frame rate has suddenly dropped, not allowing that information to transfer in. And suddenly the lag that has been introduced means that you're going to push forward and not actually see the translation of that action into your sim until, you know, a little bit later, which means you've suddenly now overcompensated and now you've pitched down or up more than you should have. So having low frame rates on a final approach is really hurtful to your ability to land the plane successfully. So for me, having a smooth frame rate is so much advantage for your landing than just for anything in general. Now, it really doesn't matter what sim you're running. It doesn't matter what setup you have. Your frame rate really governs everything. But in today's video, we're looking at P3D version 5. It really does apply to any P3D version or FSX version. And you can apply some of this to X-Plane, but I've never used it, so I don't really know. But we're talking about specifically P3D. For me, the frame rate governs the entire enjoyment of my sim because it affects the immersion factor so much. And for me, I believe the immersion factor is it's a scalable or relatable figure of enjoyment. You know, how much am I immersed into my sim is how much enjoyment I'm going to get back out. You know, am I happy flying with the default landscape with default aircraft? Or do I want a full cockpit 737 Omnico in a motions platform, you know, setup? Like, it doesn't matter which one you're running. This process applies to both the same. But for me, your immersion level directly relates to how much you're going to enjoy your sim. So I like to fly with the landscape looking a certain way. I like to use my control system in a certain way, and all that factors into my immersion into my sim, directly relating to how much I'm going to enjoy it. The frame rate is the most crucial thing, I think. If you've got your frame rate out of sync or out of whack, as I call it, it's really going to hinder your experience of enjoyment because you're going to have stutters, lag, crashes possibly. So having a good frame rate equals to having a smooth flight experience, and that equals to enjoying my sim so much more. So how do we get it? How do we get a smooth flight experience? Well, for me personally, it's me finding the ability to have a magic number in my frame rate, you know, and it's going to be different for everybody out there. It really is a number that will change depending on what system you've got. Okay. I have actually done a graphic to help explain this process, because I find it difficult to explain this process. But for me, it's pretty simple, but it's so hard for me to find the words to explain it. So I've done this little graphic, which I will take a picture of and throw up on the screen right now. So at the top, you've got your graphics card, okay? Your graphics card renders the sim onto your screen, okay? So your graphics card is one metric in which you need to manage, okay? Another metric is your monitor, because that actually displays the world that your PC is providing you, your sim, to you. So that's another metric that needs to be maintained. And the third and final one is your flight sim settings. You know, what have you got your settings to set at? Because very particular settings will change what we're talking about, which is the magic number of your frame rate. Now, it's like a triangle of these, and they're all governed by your hardware and your software. So it really does depend on your operating system, and it really does depend on your hardware that you're running within your PC as to how you can set your graphics card, how you can set up your monitor, how you can set up your sim to find that magic number, okay? But it's really governed by the hardware and software. So for me, I'm on Windows 10, and I have the latest build of Windows 10. So if you're on Windows 7 or 8 or Vista or anything else, you will have different results straight away. Even if you're on a different build of Windows 10, you will have different results. Windows really affects flight simulation, and which version of Windows you're on also truly does affect the flight simulation, because flight simulation is so intensive on your computer in terms of, you know, the amount of information it needs to process, what it needs to do. It's really heavy on your hardware, that your software, which governs everything that you do in your PC, in your sim, is like a big factor in how much you can push your sim. So in other words, you're limited by your hardware and your software as to what number of frame rate you can achieve, okay? So once you get around your limitations, you can easily find your set number, because to me, having a set number, having a number that doesn't change dynamically in your sim, is the difference between stutters and smooth flight. And everyone's going to have a different magic number, okay? So let's take me as an example, and then you can apply what you see that I do to find your magic number, okay? So my hardware, I'm running the i7-700 series CPU, which is a decent CPU. I've got 32 gig of memory in there, and I'm running the 1080 Ti graphics card, which in itself has 11 gig of video memory attached to it, right? And that plus the operating system that I use, Windows 10 build 2004 currently, means my magic number is 30, okay? 30 FPS is what I can achieve if I'm taking off in a desert or in a city with loads of AI or no AI. You know, basically, no matter what I do in the flight, in my sim, I get 30 FPS regardless, which means I get a smooth ride everywhere. Okay, that's my magic number. How did I get there? Let's find out. First off, you got to look at that triangle. Okay, your graphics card, your monitor, and your flight sim. Those are the settings that matter the most. Let's start with the monitor. Are you running a 4K monitor or are you running a 1080p monitor? It really is going to dictate your what type of frame rate is even possible. So let's have a look at mine. My monitor can not only achieve 30 hertz, it can also achieve 29, 25, and if I pushed it up to the top one, it can achieve 59 and 50. So my monitor can't actually achieve 75 frames. It can't achieve 85 or, you know, any other values than what I see in this little refresh box, okay? Now, I want my frame rate to be 30 because that's the acceptable range for me for smooth flight. The human eyes can only manage between 23 to 26 frames per second in terms of what you perceive as smooth playback. And that's really been conditioned by us, by Disney, by animation, by what has been, by the film industry, by what has been perceived as fluid motion. 24 frames for the UK and 29 frames for America is what the movie industry deems as smooth, as what their playback used to be. I think it's all now set to 60, so it makes no difference. But back in the old days, it was either 24 or 29. So, like, you will have a difference of opinion, because if you've watched a lot of movies, your eyes have been accustomed to seeing smooth frames in this 24 or 29 arena, okay? You've been basically conditioned. So there will always be a difference of opinion, because there is like 5 frames difference there straight away. It doesn't mean that Americans can see better than the English, basically. That means nothing. But overall, the human average is 23 to 26. So having an FPS value of 60 is kind of like overkill, really. And having 120 is like, I don't know what PC could actually maintain 120 frames no matter where you fly. Like, I don't know how any PC would manage that. But my PC can manage 30 FPS no matter where I fly. And my monitor can actually display me 30 FPS as well in terms of the refresh value. So the hertz value here is basically how many times does the screen get drawn per second, okay? So 30 hertz is 30 frames per second. I'm seeing 30 frames come at me. You can actually see the screen being drawn like for live if you wanted to. If you look at a news broadcast and they go on location sometimes to like a school or a workplace and there's computer monitors, if you see them flickering, right, or you see them sort of moving weirdly, it's because the frame rate of the camera is different to the frame rate of the monitor, and you're actually seeing the screen being drawn live. And you're seeing, like, let's say if the screen is 30 hertz on the monitor but 60 hertz on the camera, well, you're actually being able to see that screen being drawn, its resolution being shot up and bombed like that, because that's what's happening. Every screen, every refresh rate is actually throwing its frames at you like that, you know, and flickering like that. And so you actually see it flicker if you're, it's basically like stutter in your sim as well. If your monitor, you know, is set to a different refresh rate than what your frame rate can achieve, you're going to get stutters in your sim. And it's just like the flicker of the refresh rate. So for me, my graphics card can achieve 30 hertz for my monitor. So my monitor is a 60 hertz monitor, but it can do 30 hertz. So what you first need to find out to do is find out if your monitor can achieve a number that you feel is manageable. Now, 30 hertz for me is more than enough. Like, I could not achieve 60 frames per second in a thunderstorm over New York. Like, it would start to stutter. I think actually that my entire system is probably only able to get about 45 to 50 frames maximum anyway. Well, that's not enough for 60 FPS, is it? If I limited my frame rate in my sim to 60 FPS, or if I locked my frame rate to my monitor of 60 hertz, then my PC is going to want to maintain 60 FPS, but it's never going to achieve it. It's only going to get to like 50 maximum and then start to stutter. And the reason it's stuttering is because my graphics card is going, I'm expecting 60, mate. And my sim's going, yeah, but I'm struggling to keep up. And there's a difference there. And that's the stutter you see. So my hardware can really do 30 no matter what. And that's my magic number. I could still go down to like 25 if I wanted to, and it still be acceptable. Like, it still would work on 25. But for me, 30 is the easiest because I also stream. But by the way, whenever you're watching my flight sim videos on Twitch or YouTube, you're actually seeing them in 60 frames per second. Okay, but my flight is only in 30. And that's because OBS is basically just doubling the frame rate of my flight sim into 60. So even though I'm seeing 30 and I'm playing with 30, you're watching 60. Okay, which means if my frame rate drops to like 28, 27, 29, or even goes over to 31, 32, 33, and sort of dances in between those set values, you won't actually see that difference because the difference is spread over 60 frames. So 1 dropped frame, you'll never notice. Okay, 5 dropped frames, you might start to notice. If my frame rate suddenly went down to 9, yeah, you'd see stutters. You'd notice that in a 60 FPS, environment. But you're watching my streams at 60 FPS, but I'm only actually playing in 30 FPS. Okay, and that's specific to me because I stream or I record videos for YouTube and Twitch. And I will say that if you're playing Call of Duty and you're playing on 2 different PCs that are identical, but one is playing at 30 and one is playing at 60, you will see a definitive, very definite visual difference. You will, in terms of its playability though, like you will actually see stutters in the 30 FPS, or your shots, your bullets won't actually hit the target faster than the 60 FPS one, in that type of game where the frames are shorter, you do want a higher frame rate because it's actually advantageous to you in gameplay as well, but also in terms of fast motion on the screen, you do need a lot more frames to fill in. Flight simulation isn't about fast motion, it's about slow, steady. Okay, we have what's known as long frames and short frames, and flight simulation uses long frames, and Call of Duty type of games use short frames. And that's basically the difference. There is no point in having a monitor that can achieve 144 hertz because you can actually divide that divisible by 3. Okay, it comes out to something like 50 point whatever or 48 point whatever. That's not a whole number to divide by. 60 is a whole number you can divide by. You divide it by 2, you got 30. Boom. Even 120 is divisible by 3. But I mean, that's like what, 40? So why am I dividing by 3? Well, basically you want to find a whole number, or you want to find a number, okay, for your frame rate. Now it could be 35, it could be 40, it could be 45, it could be 50, it could even be 60. And if you can achieve 60 frames in New York with thunderstorms in PMDG aircraft, by all means go for it. Okay? But my PC won't take that. It will get to about 40, maybe even 35, and go, that's the max we can do, mate. So that's why I've chosen 30 FPS as my frame rate. And if you just watch my streams or watch my videos on YouTube, you'll see how smooth it is, and you can actually determine if I'm full of it or not. But basically, looking back at this graphic, okay, so your graphics card, your sim settings, your monitor are all directly linked to this magic number that you can achieve. So first off, what we need to do is set our graphics card to display the refresh rate that we want to achieve, in my case 30. That's done. In terms of my settings, these really kind of do affect, but I'm using the GTX 1080 Ti, and so a lot of these settings are because of that. But the one setting that's more important is this vertical sync here. What I set it to is adaptive half refresh rate. So like my graphics card knows I've got a 60 hertz monitor, okay? It knows this. It also knows that I've asked it to display only 30 of them hertz, okay? So what I'm asking it to do is take the vertical sync, which a vertical sync, by the way, will match whatever gameplay is happening to your monitor. And if I set this to on, it would try and match it to 60 hertz. It probably wouldn't achieve it, in which case I'd see stutters. So I ask it to do half the refresh rate, which means it's going to try only achieve 30. And then I combine this setting with another setting of my max frame rate. Now, you're probably thinking, well, why have you got 33 there, mate? Well, the 3 extra frames is a little buffer. So my graphics card will try and achieve 33, but I definitely know it will hit 30 by trying to achieve 33. And those extra 3 frames that it tries to achieve and probably will maintain will just sort of get lost in that 60 FPS that comes out the other end. It doesn't really, you don't perceive it, to be honest, if it does hit 33, but sometimes it won't hit 33, and so I definitely know it'll hit 30, and that's my minimum. That's what I want. So those 2 settings are the most important settings out of all of this. The rest really dictate your visual quality versus stability of maintaining those frames. So I always prefer maximum performance for my power management of my graphics card. How much power is going into that graphics card? Well, I want the full maximum, please. I find that clamp works the best, but the rest of the settings are going to be based off your hardware. Anti-aliasing and anisotropic filtering are all based on what your graphics card, your memory, and your CPU can manage within your sim. So those settings are really going to change. But if you basically just chose application controlled on all of them, then it makes no difference, because it really depends on what you set in here is more important. To be honest, these settings, you really want to mirror these settings here for the best playback of your graphics card. But the most important settings are setting your frame rate to your refresh rate. Okay, so 30, and then I say 33 for a little buffer, and then here 30 hertz. And that's my graphics card all set up. It might be different for you. You might choose 60, you might choose 25, but choose one definitive number and stick with it, and then achieve that in your sim as well. So moving over to the sim now, P3D, I turn off vertical sync in version 5. In version 4, I used to have it on. This sometimes changes. It's either going to be one of 2 ways. Vertical sync off, unlimited frames on. Or vertical sync on, and you lock your frame rate to the same value as what you set in your graphics card. In my case, it'd be 33. So it's either going to be that, or it's going to be this, okay? And it really does depend on which update changes, because sometimes I find that this actually maintains 33 in my sim, and then sometimes I find that it doesn't, yet this does. Now, what's the advantages of having a targeted frame rate and having your VSync on? Well, your VSync is obviously going to sync it to your monitor. My case, it's 60 hertz, but my graphics card is trying to maintain 30. So it should dance between 30 and 60. That's not very good. That's why we target the frame rate here to 33. The benefit of doing this as well is that the extra power that your PC has goes into the loading of your scenery. Therefore, you don't get blurry textures and you don't have loading issues in draw distance, okay? If you set it to unlimited, it suddenly activates this other setting in your sim, and you can actually get blurry textures and draw distance loading, okay? The only way to combat that is to actually have a targeted frame rate set, and that way your PC will only try and achieve 33 frames per second in this case, and then the rest of the engine power goes into the loading of the scenery. Those are your most important settings. The rest of the settings is basically helping you maintain this setting here. So for me, there's no point in putting 4K textures in, because I've got a 1080p monitor. There's a very minimal difference between the 4K textures and the 2K textures on a 1080p machine or a 1080p display. So for me, to keep my VRAM down, I choose the high setting. Whoop. This setting here, I'm able to put to max, but you might find that you have to choose a lower. But these 3 settings here are really going to directly relate to what you chose on your graphics card end. Okay, I find that 8 and 16 works the best for me, and having this set off. But you know, I would say you have to experiment on your end, because this really dictates, or this really relates to your hardware and what add-ons you've got in your sim as to how beneficial it is to your frame rate trying to achieve that magic number. So experiment and find your own level, because it's going to be different for everybody. I feel there is no one magic PC. Like if you go and watch another streamer and they're sharing their settings, well, if you try and copy them settings, you're never, unless you've got the same PC as them and using the same add-ons, you're never going to achieve the same result. Because there's so many variables that are changing it all up. So you really need to experiment with these 3 yourself. And save profiles as well. You know, have a profile for every different type of thing, and that again will also help you maintain 30 FPS. As you can see, I run a lot of high settings, and I still maintain the 30 FPS within my sim. And that again is because I'm maintaining what I do show. So if you look at my add-ons, look at all that things that aren't ticked. I only tick what I'm going to show in my sim. Okay, in my scenery library is only ticked to what I'm actually going to fly in my sim. There is a lot of stuff here that ain't ticked. If I was to suddenly tick everything, it would probably take an hour to load, you know. But I only tick even the mesh or the default sceneries. I only tick where I'm going to fly, you know. And I find that that also helps maintain a 30 FPS as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into this magic number. For me, it's 30. But what's your magic number? Is it 40? Is it 60? Is it 25? You know, find a number that you can fly in any type of weather in, and you will find that you will have a smooth flight no matter where you go. And your magic number is directly tied to your graphics card, your flight sim, and your monitor. And a lot of people will try and argue with, well, 60 FPS is better than 30. And I have to argue, well, actually, I actually think visually it looks better at 30. If you look at my videos, you can see, you know, in fact, I'll play a clip now. And you can actually see that for me, I feel that this is better, but it also depends on the add-ons you use and the monitor you have, you know. But this is what works for me, and this is how I use it. And I hope it's been of some benefit to you. I hope you've been able to find what you've been looking for, and that your flight experience is no longer hindered by your frame rate. Thanks for watching.